The morning sun, filtered through the meticulously trimmed hedges of the oaks at Willow Creek, typically cast long golden shadows across Elias Thorne's yard. But this morning the light felt surgical, exposing the single, illicit item that brought color to his life: the cedar-shingled chicken coop. Elias crouched next to the run, watching the feathered four, Henrietta, Penelope, Colonel, and the perpetually anxious Cluck Norris, scratch at the dewy grass. The rhythmic, contented clucking was the only balm he'd found since the layoffs had gutted his team and left him hollowed out, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. A year ago, he'd bought the house for the promise of community, trading the unpredictable chaos of city living for what he'd hoped was peaceful suburbia. He hadn't realized he was trading one form of chaos for another: the tyranny of the Homeowners Association, led by Eleanor Vance. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," Elias murmured, scooping fresh water into their dispenser. "Keep it down. Mama Karen is patrolling." He smiled, a genuine, relaxed curve of his lips that felt alien these days. The chickens were his therapy, a biological alarm clock, and a silent, warm source of pride. The fact that the eggs were the deepest, richest orange he'd ever seen was just a bonus. He knew they were a violation. The covenant was clear: no livestock. Pets restricted to cats and dogs, maximum 2 per household. But the coop was small, tucked behind the shed, and the silent agreement in the neighborhood seemed to be, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. That agreement shattered at 9:02 a.m. Elias was tying up the feed sack when his phone buzzed. It was an email from the official HOA address, but the sender was a personal account: Eleanor, VanceWillowCreekHOA.org. The subject line was chillingly terse: Re-Community Aesthetic Compliance. He opened the attachment. It wasn't a fine yet, but a formal notice of inquiry. "Mr. Thorne, it has been brought to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that elements inconsistent with the established community aesthetic and covenant, specifically pertaining to unauthorized outdoor structures and potential livestock, may be present on your property at 14 Oak Glen Drive. Please remit a response and corrective action plan within 72 hours, or a formal violation and associated daily fines will be issued without further notice." The language was ice-cold, the tone condescending. It wasn't anonymous. Eleanor Vance had signed it herself as President, HOA Board of Directors. She wasn't playing coy. She was marking her territory. Elias felt the familiar hot rush of anxiety. He went inside and pulled the thick leather-bound covenant off the bookshelf, flipping to the section on enforcement. Fine structure, first violation warning. Second violation, and text, $100 fine. Third violation, text, $500 per day until corrected, followed by potential forced compliance and legal action. Eleanor hadn't issued a warning. She'd skipped straight to the inquiry. That meant she had proof, or at least a highly credible report. He frantically checked his Ring camera footage from the previous week. Thursday afternoon, Eleanor Vance, in a perfectly tailored beige suit and sunglasses, slowing her golf cart to a near stop right outside his hedge line. She was holding a small notebook, her eyes narrowed, scanning. On Friday, a drone, a consumer model, annoyingly, had briefly hovered at the exact height of his shed roof. "The woman used a drone to spy on my backyard." That night, Elias worked feverishly, dragging plywood and lattice from his garage. He constructed a towering, multi-layered privacy screen around the entire co-op area, weaving fake ivy through the lattice until the enclosure was invisible from every angle he could access outside his fence line. He replaced the loud metal feed tins with quiet ceramic bowls. He even started using a small, battery-operated vacuum to remove stray feathers from the lawn daily. He was paranoid, meticulous, and exhausted. For 2 days, there was silence. He thought he'd won the first skirmish. On the third day, the deadline for his corrective action plan, Elias returned from his afternoon therapy session, the only thing more expensive than a daily HOA fine. He pulled into his driveway and saw the shadow. Eleanor Vance's white Lexus SUV was parked strategically across the street, just past the Vance family's immaculate, fountain-adorned lawn. She wasn't in it. She was standing on the narrow strip of common area grass dividing his property from his neighbor's, arms crossed over her crisp white shirt, her face a mask of supreme disapproval. Elias slammed the car door, the noise echoing too loudly in the manicured silence. "Afternoon, Eleanor," he said, forcing a polite, measured tone. He walked toward his mailbox, trying to appear nonchalant. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was like crushed ice, brittle and cold. "I see you missed the 72-hour window for submission." "The clock hasn't run out yet," he countered, checking his watch. "And I did, in fact, take corrective action. The unauthorized structure you referenced is now fully shielded from public view, meeting the aesthetic compliance standard you cited." Eleanor's smile was chilling, a thin, triumphant crescent. "I appreciate your effort, Elias, truly, but I wasn't referring to the structure." She took a slow step closer, her gaze fixed on the corner of his yard. "The covenant is very clear. No livestock. No amount of lattice or ivy can mask the smell of animal feed, or the noise of unauthorized animals, or, crucially, the presence of them, Mr. Thorne." Elias felt a slow-motion dread seize his chest. No, I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Eleanor. I have no livestock." As if summoned by the lie, a soft, unmistakable cluck, cluck, cluck drifted from behind the shed. Colonel, the loudest of the flock, clearly announcing a freshly laid egg. Eleanor lifted one eyebrow. "Oh, Elias, you really shouldn't insult my intelligence. I saw them. Yesterday, I saw you opening the gate. And I have sworn statements from 3 neighbors confirming both the sight and the sound of your illegal chickens." She snapped open a manila folder she'd been holding, tucked under her arm. Inside was a brightly colored sheet of paper. "This, Mr. Thorne, is a formal violation notice, skipping the second warning due to the deliberate nature of non-compliance. Effective immediately, you are being assessed a daily fine of das text, $500. You have 48 hours to remove the animals and the structure from the property, or the HOA will move to place a lien on your house for continuous covenant violation." She held out the paper. Elias's hand shook as he took it. The number text of $500 blazed against the white paper. "And text $500 a day. That was net text, $15,000 a month. He barely had enough in savings to cover 3 months of the mortgage. This was a financial bullet pointed straight at his solvency. You can't be serious," Elias stammered. "They're just 4 hens. They don't even crow. They're pets. They lay eggs. They're quieter than most dogs in this neighborhood." "They are chickens," Eleanor enunciated, drawing out the word like a vile disease. "They attract vermin, they lower property values, and they are expressly forbidden by the covenant which you signed. This is not a democracy, Elias. It is a community of standards. Comply or face the consequences." She turned, her mission accomplished, and walked toward her waiting Lexus. "Eleanor!" Elias called out, the humiliation burning in his throat. "What am I supposed to do with them? I can't just get rid of them. They're mine." She paused, looking back over her shoulder, her face betraying not a shred of sympathy. "That, Mr. Thorne, is entirely your problem." Elias stood motionless in his driveway, the fine notice fluttering in his trembling hand. He was cornered. He could sell the house, but the market was slow, and the violation would have to be disclosed. He could surrender the chickens, but the thought of handing over Henrietta and Colonel, the only things keeping his panic attacks at bay, felt like ripping out a piece of his own flesh. He walked past the shed, his shadow falling over the small enclosure. The 4 birds blinked up at him, innocent and utterly unaware of the financial death sentence their existence had just triggered. "I can't let her win," he whispered, the words ragged. "I can't lose this house, and I can't lose you guys." He stared at the on-text, $500 fine notice. Then he remembered something, a late-night rabbit hole dive into obscure HOA case law and a half-joking conversation with his sister, a disability attorney, months ago. A radical, impossible idea that had been shelved as a last resort. Elias pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He found his sister's number and hit call. His face, minutes ago etched with desperation, hardened into something entirely new, calculated, cold and utterly reckless. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need a legal favor. A big one. I need to know the paperwork required to register 4 miniature hens as emotional support animals." The silence on the line after Elias's request, the one about registering 4 miniature hens as emotional support animals, stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. Sarah, a pragmatist steeped in the acid bath of corporate disability law, finally broke it with a sound Elias couldn't place, something between a cough and a nervous laugh. "Elias, stop. This is legally precarious, bordering on fraud. You can't just stamp therapy chicken on Henrietta and call it a day." "I know. Sarah, I know the difference between an ESA and a service animal," Elias pleaded. Pacing his living room, the bond text and $500 fine notice still a crisp. Terrifying presence on his coffee table. But the Fair Housing Act? Tell me I'm wrong. Doesn't reasonable accommodation apply here? If a legitimate therapist prescribes them for my documented anxiety and depression, and they don't fundamentally alter the integrity of the property or pose a direct threat, the HOA's no livestock rule is superseded, right? Sarah sighed, the professional exasperation evident even over the phone. "The principle is sound. The FHA is notoriously broad on species. It's about the accommodation, not the animal. But the documentation has to be airtight. You need a letter from a licensed mental health professional, dated, signed, and specific, not some internet registry garbage. And you need to be prepared for the fight of your life, because the moment you hand Eleanor Vance that letter, she will not rest until she proves it's a fake, frivolous, or fraudulent claim. She will hire the best, nastiest HOA counsel in the state, Elias." "Good," Elias said, the word coming out with a strange, fierce relief. "Because I'm tired of losing. The Nantex of $500 daily fine starts in 48 hours, Sarah. That's my house. Can you connect me with a professional who understands the FHA nuances?" Sarah hesitated. "I know a few telemedicine practices that deal exclusively with the intersection of PTSD, anxiety, and the need for non-traditional ESAs. They charge a fortune for a fast-track consultation, and they are incredibly selective. They will grill you. You have to be honest about your condition, Elias, and your relationship with those birds. This isn't a game. It's the only way to save my home, Sarah. Send me the link." The next 24 hours were a blur of cold, transactional intimacy. Elias booked the most expensive, immediate consultation with Dr. Lena Shah, a specialist who operated out of a high-end telehealth platform. The fee was astronomical, more than he spent on therapy in 2 months. But this wasn't therapy. It was weaponizing his condition for legal defense. The video call started precisely on time. Dr. Shah was professional, her expression guarded. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Thorne, my office is only interested in providing legitimate documentation based on clinical need. I understand you are seeking a letter of prescription for 4 chickens. This is highly unusual. You need to articulate why a common animal, a cat, a dog, even a rabbit, cannot perform the function of emotional support that these chickens provide." Elias felt the pressure rising. He took a deep breath, avoiding the camera, and looked at the 4 feathered creatures scratching obliviously outside his window. He decided to tell the simple, painful truth. "After the layoffs, I started having panic attacks. They were getting worse. The medication helped, but I still felt disconnected, like nothing depended on me. Then I got Henrietta. The chickens they're immediate. They don't analyze. They don't judge. They have a schedule that is absolutely mandatory, twice daily feeding, watering, cleanup. It forces me out of bed, outside, into sunlight. When I'm dissociating, focusing on the texture of their feathers, the weight of a fresh egg in my hand, it grounds me. And the deep, rhythmic clucking." He swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "It's the only sound that drowns out the noise in my head. A dog requires walks, which increases my social anxiety. The chickens require me here now. They are small, quiet, contained, and they are the only thing that has consistently brought my generalized anxiety disorder below a functional threshold for the past 9 months." He waited, heart-pounding, convinced the doctor would disconnect and flag him as an opportunist. Dr. Shah was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on his profile. Finally, she nodded slowly. A behavioral necessity for structured, contained responsibility combined with a unique auditory and tactile grounding mechanism. I see. And you have documentation from your primary therapist regarding your GAD and depression diagnosis? Yes, I sent that over this morning. Very well, Mr. Thorne, I will draft the letter. It will state that the maintenance and presence of 4 specific, designated animals are necessary for your mental well-being and are considered a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act. Her lips twitched in the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. They are officially your prescribed feathered support team. 33 minutes later, an encrypted PDF arrived in Elias's inbox. It was perfect. Dr. Shaw's letterhead was imposing, the language was clinical and authoritative, and the gold-embossed seal gleamed even on the printout. Elias carefully folded the document into a clean white envelope, feeling a surge of power, not the power of a fine, but the power of the law. He had exactly 2 hours before the 48-hour fine deadline hit. He walked the 100 yards across the immaculate concrete sidewalk to Eleanor Vance's house. The house was a monument to HOA compliance, flawless lawn, identical window treatments, a bronze fountain murmuring softly in the front garden. Eleanor opened the door herself, her expression shifting instantly from polite neighbor to predatory authority. She wore a tailored athleisure set and diamond studs that caught the morning light. "Elias," she greeted him, her voice dripping with disappointed superiority. "The deadline is fast approaching. Did you bring the signed affidavits from the neighbors confirming the chickens are gone?" Elias didn't flinch. He held out the envelope. "I brought my compliance documents, Eleanor. They address the unauthorized animals in a way that supersedes the local covenant." She took the envelope reluctantly, her long lavender fingernails tapping impatiently as she ripped it open. She pulled out the document and began to read, her face initially registering bored dismissal. "Emotional support animals," she scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. "Elias, what ridiculous scam are you trying to pull now? You're trying to compare a chicken to a seeing-eye dog? Are you aware that this community—" Her voice trailed off. Her eyes had caught the precise phrasing, the formal citation of the Fair Housing Act, FHA, the mention of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA precedents, and the name and license number of a legitimate, prescribing mental health professional. The word prescription seemed to jump off the page. Her expression didn't just change, it cracked. The casual arrogance dissolved, replaced by a mixture of shock and utter consuming fury. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving the meticulously applied makeup stark against her skin. This is a joke," she hissed, gripping the paper so tightly her knuckles were white. "This is a fraudulent claim to circumvent the clear rules of this community. You think you can use a loophole to keep farm animals in an exclusive residential development? It's not a joke, Eleanor. It's a reasonable accommodation for a documented disability. The law is very clear. The FHA states that an HOA must make an exception to its rules for an ESA, provided they do not cause an undue burden or direct threat. My 4 hens are quiet, contained, non-aggressive, and they do not fundamentally alter the nature of the community." Elias's heart was pounding, but he maintained eye contact, his voice steady. Furthermore, because the animals are now legally classified as an accommodation, the daily fine of the text, $500, must be suspended immediately, and all violation records pertaining to the feathered support team must be purged. He delivered the last line not as a request, but as a legal demand. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She was calculating, processing the massive threat this represented, not just to her authority, but to the entire structure of the HOA's power. If she backed down now, it set a precedent. If she fought and lost, the HOA would pay massive legal fees. You have until 5 p.m. to send an official HOA email confirming the suspension of the fine and the retraction of the violation notice. Elias finished, turning to leave. "I suggest you consult your counsel immediately. Don't you dare walk away, Thorne!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice losing its carefully polished edge, raw rage flooding in. "I will not let this stand. I will find another angle. I will have the HOA attorney review this, and we will find every single technicality. Do those birds disturb the quiet enjoyment of my property, Elias? Do they attract coyotes? Do they lower my property value? We will investigate everything. If the Fair Housing Act says you can keep them, it doesn't say you can keep them clean. I will enforce the absolute letter of the sanitation code until your backyard is deemed a health hazard. Elias paused, his hand on her gate latch. He didn't turn around, but his voice was loud enough for the quiet street to hear. I look forward to your 5 p.m. email, Eleanor. And I look forward to the battle over the definition of a clean chicken coop. My girls, by the way, are organic and meticulously cared for. He walked away, leaving Eleanor Vance standing in her perfect doorway, the official-looking ESA letter trembling in her hand, her face a mask of thwarted, absolute fury. The fine was paused. The chickens were safe for now. But Elias knew with ICC Thorne, pursuant to recent documentation provided regarding an accommodation request under the Fair Housing Act, the Board of Directors has temporarily suspended the accrued daily fine and retracted the formal violation notice pending a comprehensive review of the conditions of the accommodation. The suspension is contingent upon continuous, strict adherence to all existing sanitation and pest control provisions outlined in the Willow Creek Covenant, Section 4.3, subsection G, and all applicable county health regulations. You will be contacted shortly regarding a mandatory independent compliance audit. Eleanor hadn't signed it. The sender was the general HOA office email. It was a victory, but the chilling final sentence proved her promise. She had shifted from contesting the existence of the chickens to contesting the conditions of their existence. The war had just moved from the front line to the trenches. The comprehensive review began the next day. A physical packet arrived via certified mail, thick and heavy. It contained not the one-page sanitation rule, but a 20-page addendum citing the minutiae of the County Health Department Code 405.2, adapted by the HOA attorney for residential livestock containment. It demanded compliance logs, daily waste removal, log time, volume and disposal method of all fecal matter. Signed, weekly pest control activity log, detailed accounting of any rodent, insect, bait usage, sightings, and remedial action. Monthly ambient air quality report, requiring documented measurements of ammonia levels within 3 feet of the coop structure, certified by a third-party air quality monitor, annual veterinary health certificates. For each ESA, confirming freedom from zoonotic disease. The sheer absurdity was breathtaking. Measuring chicken coop ammonia levels? Elias called Sarah immediately. They're trying to bury me in paperwork and compliance costs. The ammonia monitoring alone is hundreds of dollars a month. They can't mandate a third-party monitor unless the covenant explicitly allows the HOA to dictate which vendors you use. Which it probably doesn't, Sarah advised, her voice tight. Buy a $150 digital ammonia sensor. Log the results. Follow the law to the letter, Elias, but document their overreach. Every demand they make that exceeds what the county health department requires for a pet dog, you flag it. This is a game of who blinks first, and Eleanor wants you to self-destruct from exhaustion. Elias accepted the challenge with a grim resolve. He spent on text $2,000 on equipment, a military grade, metal-lined feed bin, a specialized self-cleaning water dispenser, and a digital air quality sensor that beeped incessantly, flashing bright green numbers that always read 0.00 ppm because his coop was immaculate. The chickens, dubbed the Feathered Support Team, FST, in his logs, lived in luxury, but Elias was miserable. He stopped sleeping through the night. Every late evening noise, every rustle of leaves sent him scrambling outside with a high-powered flashlight, checking the perimeter for a rogue mouse that could trigger a pest-sighting violation. The simple, therapeutic joy of tending them was replaced by the cold, anxiety-inducing pressure of code compliance. The neighborhood was now a pressure cooker. Neighbors, previously supportive or indifferent, were forced to take a side. Across the street, the Murrays, who hated Eleanor, started dropping off bags of high-end organic feed as silent solidarity. Next door, the Petersons, friends of the Vances, installed a massive, rotating patio umbrella that, when fully extended, blocked Elias's direct sunlight for half the day. A passive-aggressive maneuver Elias was certain Eleanor had orchestrated. Eleanor, meanwhile, adopted the demeanor of a martyr. She drove her golf cart past his house 4 times a day, slowing down to stare at his carefully logged trash can. She started attending every single HOA board meeting wearing stark black suits, railing against frivolous attempts to circumvent community standards and the potential devaluation of our collective assets due to poorly regulated livestock. She successfully passed a new rule, the Vance Ordinance, mandating that all ESAs housed outside must undergo a mandatory, unannounced inspection within 72 hours of an HOA request. The inspection request came a week later. Mandatory compliance audit, Thursday, 10 a.m. The email listed the participants: Eleanor Vance, the HOA's outside legal counsel, and, most ominously, Mr. Thomas Klein. County Health Department Compliance Officer Elias felt a cold wave of nausea. Eleanor had pulled out the heavy artillery. A county health violation was non-negotiable and could result in immediate animal seizure. He spent the next 2 days cleaning, sanitizing, and organizing his records. He pressure-washed the run, sterilized the waterers, replaced every inch of bedding, and organized the compliance binder, now 4 inches thick, into color-coded, labeled sections. He even calculated the daily average decibel output of the 4 chickens, 55 dB, comparable to a quiet office. Thursday, 9:55 a.m. Elias stood outside his coop gate, impeccably dressed but vibrating with anxiety. He held the thick binder like a shield. At 10 a.m. sharp, the procession arrived. Eleanor, looking triumphant in a Navy power suit, was flanked by Mr. Klein, a stoic man in a pressed county uniform, and a thin, severe lawyer named Mr. Sterling. "Good morning." "Mr. Thorne," Eleanor purred, folding her arms. "We are here to conduct a non-negotiable review of your facility to ensure it does not pose a health or safety hazard to the community. Mr. Klein will lead the assessment." Mr. Klein, ignoring the posturing, nodded curtly. "Mr. Thorne, I am only interested in 2 things: vector control and potential public health issues. May I see the animals in the enclosure?" Elias unlocked the gate. The 3 figures stepped inside the carefully constructed privacy shield. The air was clean, smelling faintly of pine shavings and fresh grass. Henrietta and Penelope clucked softly, unbothered. Klein spent 15 minutes meticulously examining the coop. He checked the feed storage, running a gloved hand along the sealed bin. He examined the litter, the roosts, and the dust bath. He took out a small digital reader and held it near the bedding. "Ammonia levels, 0.0 ppm, he stated flatly. He checked the perimeter. "No signs of rodent ingress or droppings. Enclosure construction is secure. Proper drainage." He turned to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, your facility is cleaner than most commercial poultry setups I see. Where are your compliance logs?" Elias handed over the binder. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, snatched it, flipping through the tabs. He paused at the ammonia logs, the pest control reports, and the vet certificates. He looked up at Eleanor, his expression falling into professional neutrality. Eleanor, who had been hovering, ready to point out a single stray feather, was seething. "But what about the smell? The inherent risk of waste?" Klein shook his head. "The waste is properly contained and logged for disposal. The sanitation is immaculate. From a public health standpoint, this is a non-issue. I will issue a clean bill of compliance to the HOA." Eleanor's face was a study in devastating, silent defeat. She had thrown everything, her power, the HOA's money, a county official, and Elias had perfectly prepared for every contingency. "Wait," Mr. Sterling said, tapping a page in the covenant section of Elias's binder. Section 4.3G mandates that all outdoor facilities must not attract pests, including but not limited to large ground-dwelling mammals. "Mr. Thorne, is that your shed?" He pointed to the back corner of Elias's property. "Yes, it is." "And you store feed in it?" Sterling pressed, sensing a weakness. "No. The feed is stored in the metal bin by the house as per the log," Elias corrected, pointing. Just as the lawyer started to look defeated again, a loud, frantic squeak cut through the air, followed by a frantic scratching noise, not from Elias's side of the fence, but from the Petersons' property, right where the rotating patio umbrella stood. A massive, plump Norway rat, startled by the commotion, suddenly shot out from under the Petersons' immaculate-looking hedge, darted across the yard, and disappeared under the porch of the Vance residence. Eleanor froze, aghast. "Mr. Klein?" The county compliance officer looked up slowly, then pulled out a small notepad. "That is a considerable pest vector," Klein noted clinically, pointing his pen at the Vance porch. "Norway rats are a known public health concern. Mr. Sterling, please note, pest sighting on property adjacent to the facility being assessed, with the point of ingress appearing to be the main residence at 12 Oak Glen Drive, which, I believe, is Mrs. Vance's address?" Eleanor stammered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "That is impossible! Our home is sprayed weekly." Klein merely raised an eyebrow. "A large ground-dwelling mammal attracted to the immediate vicinity, sighted and logged. I'll be requesting that the HOA schedule a comprehensive pest control inspection for 12 Oak Glen Drive as a priority. This is a much more significant threat to community health than a clean chicken coop." Eleanor Vance had brought the county health department to Elias Thorne's property to expose a health hazard, only for the inspection to confirm the flawless status of the chickens and, instead, document a massive, embarrassing pest problem at her own house. The war of attrition had just provided the most poetic, immediate piece of karmic justice. The immediate fallout from the county health department audit was swift and brutal. Eleanor Vance, still reeling from the documentation of a pest vector on her own porch, the ultimate suburban shame, tried to silence the report. She attempted to use her presidential authority to bury the audit findings and censure Mr. Sterling, the HOA's outside counsel, for allowing the inspection to proceed. But Sterling, covering his own liability, had already forwarded the report to the full 5-member board and the HOA management company. The cost of Eleanor's hyper-compliance war, the legal consultation fees, the expense of bringing in a county officer, the failed attempt to issue a text, a $500 daily fine, had hemorrhaged the HOA's legal defense budget. The neighborhood, previously cowed, now had a focal point for their resentment. The news of the Vance rat was a delicious whispered scandal. More damaging was the Vance Ordinance, the rule Eleanor had pushed through mandating surprise ESA inspections. For the first time, homeowners realized her pettiness didn't just target Elias and his chickens. It threatened their privacy and their wallets. Elias, exhausted but energized by the turn of events, met with the Murrays, the neighbors who had been dropping off feed. "She's scrambling," Mrs. Murray, a retired teacher with a steely backbone, confirmed. "Her husband, Robert, is livid. He's telling everyone the legal fees alone are going to force a special assessment on the homeowners to replenish the reserve fund. She made a motion to challenge your ESA documentation, to subpoena your therapist, but it was defeated 3-2. The board is split." "It's time to end it," Elias stated, looking across the table at the Murrays and 2 other longtime residents he'd secretly consulted. "She keeps escalating, and the HOA keeps paying. We need a formal board resolution at the next meeting. A vote of no confidence, or at least a motion to immediately repeal the Vance Ordinance and issue a formal, permanent acceptance of the FHA accommodation." They agreed to circulate a petition demanding a special meeting. The petition gained steam quickly, fueled by the rising fear of a special assessment. Eleanor was forcing the community to pay for her personal vendetta. The special HOA board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the Willow Creek Clubhouse multipurpose room. The atmosphere was less community governance and more jury deliberation. Every chair was filled and people stood along the back wall. Elias sat near the front, armed with his compliance binder and a new, slim folder containing the full breakdown of the last 6 weeks of HOA expenses directly tied to his case. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the 4 other board members. Her tailored blazer seemed a shade too tight, her smile a brittle effort to project control. She began with the financial report, but before she could pivot to blaming the budget strain on misguided compliance efforts, Mr. Thompson, the treasurer, interrupted her. "Before we move on, Madam President, I must address the elephant in the room. The audit of Mr. Thorne's emotional support animals, which you commissioned, cost the association $8,400 in legal fees and consulting costs. The result of that expense was a documented clean bill of health for the animals and a documented health hazard citation on the premises of the board president. This is an unacceptable use of homeowner funds. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Eleanor slammed her gavel down. Order! That is slander, Mr. Thompson. The cost was necessary to prevent a precedent. And the pest report is completely unsubstantiated. It was substantiated by a county health officer, Eleanor. Elias cut in, his voice rising, clear and firm. He stood holding up the expense breakdown. And it was your action, Eleanor, that forced the expense. Since the board refused to challenge my FHA accommodation legally, you attempted to destroy my quality of life and financial stability through petty, punitive bureaucracy, the daily fine threat, the 20-page compliance mandate, and the illegal Vance ordinance. He walked toward the center of the room, turning to face the homeowners. I came here for peace. I signed the covenant. When my mental health declined, my doctor prescribed 4 small, quiet hens, my feathered support team, as a necessary accommodation. I have adhered to every rule, and when Eleanor invented new, impossible rules, I adhered to those too at great personal cost. He opened his binder. I have documentation here proving that my 4 chickens generate less noise than an air conditioning unit and maintain a sanitation standard higher than many of your commercial kitchens. But this is not about chickens. This is about power. Eleanor has been running this association as a dictatorship, forcing neighbors into costly, miserable, and unnecessary legal fights that serve only her need for control. Mrs. Murray stood up in the back. I move that we immediately hold a vote on 2 resolutions. First, the immediate and permanent repeal of the Vance Ordinance. Second, a motion of no confidence in the leadership of President Vance and a vote for her immediate removal from the HOA board. The motion was seconded instantly by 4 different people. The room buzzed with chaotic support. Eleanor, her face a mask of scarlet, pounded the gavel again and again. This is irregular. This is an unauthorized coup. You cannot remove a board president without actually— Madam President, Mr. Sterling interrupted, stepping forward. His loyalty now clearly shifted to the solvency of the HOA. Article 3, Section B of the bylaws states that a majority vote of the membership present at a special meeting, called by petition, can effect a removal for cause, which includes repeated negligent misuse of association funds and resources. The chairman of the meeting, a quiet older man named Mr. Chen, took over. We will vote on the motion for removal first. All homeowners in favor of the immediate removal of Eleanor Vance from the board of directors, raise your hands. The hands shot up. A sea of them, almost every person in the room. It was overwhelming, absolute. Eleanor stared, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The vote was unanimous among the homeowners present, save for 1 vote cast by her friend, Mr. Peterson. The 4 other board members looked down, unwilling to meet her eye. Mr. Chen announced the count. Motion passes by overwhelming majority. Eleanor Vance, effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as board president and removed from the board of directors. Eleanor stood up, knocking her chair over with a deafening crash. Her veneer of civility was gone, replaced by pure, blinding hatred. She didn't look at the board or the homeowners. Her eyes locked on Elias. You won the battle, Thorne, she spat, her voice tight with venom. But you didn't win the war. You set a precedent. You opened the door. You think this community will be satisfied with chickens now? You gave every single malcontent a handbook on how to use the law to break the rules. You watch what happens to this neighborhood now. You watch them bring in goats, pigs, whatever monstrosity they want, all thanks to your pathetic little loophole. She snatched her purse, pushed through the crowd, and stalked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned, triumphant, and yet slightly disturbed silence. Elias had won. The chickens were safe. But Eleanor's final, desperate warning that his victory might have unforeseen, chaotic consequences for the entire community left a cold residue of dread in the air. He had dethroned the queen, but perhaps he had merely unleashed anarchy.